It's amazing to come back to visit. And it's amazing to see the energy that you bring to this house. And you're right. My parents would have been very proud that this room is used to teach Torah and that the house is, kind of alive. And the fact that you kept this house alive is really a credit to everybody here in the community and would make them very, very proud. So it's great to be back here. It's great to be able to teach Torah here. My father's second yahrzeit is tonight. So I just want to share a quick thought. My father loved davening. He liked studying the davening. That was his favorite thing. So I want to look at something that I don't know that he ever talked about, but something that he was familiar with. And that is, I want to look at the Shmona Esreis on Shabbos. And I want to just notice something about the Shmona Esreis on Shabbos. And that is that all year long, the three Amidahs that we recite every day are the same Amidah. What does that mean? It means the Mariv Amidah is the same as the Shachris Amidah, is the same as the Mintz Amidah. During the week, obviously that's true. On a Yontif, on a holiday, that's also true, right? It's the same exact Amidah. It's the same exact Amidah. On Rosh Hashanah, the same Amidah. Mariv, Shachris, and Mincha is the same Amidah. Yom Kippur, it's the same Amidah. The only day during the year in which the three Amidahs are different from one another is on Shabbos. On Friday night, we have a paragraph, Atah Kidashta et Yom Hashvi Lishmecha. In the morning, we say Yismach Moshe. In the afternoon, we say Atah Echad. Now, we don't think about it all that often, but that's interesting. That's super interesting. That Shabbos is the only day of the year, literally of the year, in which the three regular Shmona Esreis are different one from the other. Now, Musaf is an additional tefillah. That doesn't count. We're not going to talk about that. But that's just super interesting that that's so. So first of all, let me make a point that my father would make, and that is, what's the first word of every Shmona Esrei of the year? What's the first word of every Shmona Esrei of the year? So we have the first three brachas, Baruch, right? Then it goes to Akel HaKadosh. That's the standard. Then you have the middle part that changes from the week to Shabbos to Yantif to all the other times. In the middle part, after Ha'el HaKadosh, what's the first word? Atah. That's true during the week. Atah chonei ladam das. That's true on Yantif. Atah v'chartanu, right? Atah. That's true on Shabbos. Friday night you say Atah kidashta. Shabbos afternoon you say Atah echad. Atah is the first word, except for Shabbos morning. On Shabbos morning you say Yismach Moshe. For some reason, Shabbos morning is different. It's the only Shmona Esrei during the entire year, again, leaving Musaf out, that does not start with the word Atah. Now, why is that? So you have to remember one thing, and that is that until around the year 850, there were no Sidurim. Davening was done by heart, or davening was done by a chazan, and everybody answered Amen. So you needed little tricks to remember how to daven. So you always remember the first word was Atah. You got to remember what day of the week it was. So therefore, what you say after Atah. But at least the first word was Atah. It got you started. And so the word Atah is the first word in every Shmona Esrei. That's kind of just like a trivia question, but it's an interesting little point. That actually, this Shabbos was Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. And how did the middle part of the Shmona Esrei begin? Atah yatzarta, right? On a regular Shabbos, we don't say that. We say tikanta. It doesn't start with Atah. That's for a very specific reason, because the Musaf on Shabbos is actually a backwards acrostic. It goes from Taf to Aleph. It's like, it's ABC, but it's backwards. So that's why it doesn't start with Atah. But this Shabbos, Atah yatzarta also started with Atah. Atah seems to be the key word. But Shabbos morning, for some reason, it's not. It doesn't start with the word Atah. So what I want to do today, what my father would want to look at is, why is that? That's, whenever you have something that's so striking, it's the only Shmon Esrei the whole year that doesn't start with the word Atah. What is it about? So let's just explain very, quickly what the three Shmon Esreis of Shabbos are about. On Friday night, we talk about creation. That's the Kiddush, right? Yom HaShishi, Vaychul HaShamayim V'Aretz. We talk about the fact that Shabbos is Zecher L'Masei Bereshis. It's commemorative of creation. You sanctified the seventh day. It was the culmination of the creation. You blessed it from the days and you sanctified it from the times. And we quote the pasuk from the story of creation. Okay? So Friday night, the Shmona Esrei is about creation. Mincha, Atah Echad. Same thing. Atah Echad. What's the theme of Mincha? Atah Echad, v'shimcha Echad, umi ka'amcha Yisrael goyechad ba'aretz. You're one and your name is one. Now that's familiar because we say that every single morning in the daven. At the end of Az Yashir, what do we say? V'yalu Moshim Har Tzion lishpotes haresav, Vaysal Hashem haMelucha. V'haya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz. By Yom Hahu, on that day in the future, Yiyeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. You, God, will be one, and your name will be one. This line in the Mincha on Shabbos reflects that pasuk that talks about the end of days. So, if Friday night we talk about creation, Mincha we talk about the future. Mincha, we talk about a time where Shabbos is going to be a day of rest, right? Yom Shekulo Shabbos. The world to come will all be a day of Shabbos. So Friday night we have creation. Shabbos afternoon we have the idea of Shabbos in the future. Then we come to Shacharis. And Shacharis, again, is a little different. First of all, I'm going to start with Atah. Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelko. Moshe rejoiced at the gift of his portion. What is that? Ki eved ne'eman karasalo. He got a gift because he was God's faithful servant. Kalil tiferes berosho nasatolo. You, God, you placed on his head a crown of glory. What was that crown of glory? When Moshe, the Torah tells us at the end of Shmos, when Moshe came down from the mountain, Karan or Panav, that his face was aglow. It was that, and here, that's my father will tell you this in a second, right? What's so nice about the davening is that the davening is a medrash on the Torah. And here, clearly, Tiferes Broshon Asatolo. We don't get that impression from the Chumash that it was a crown, but that's what it was. It was a crown. Moshe came down from the mountain. The light, he was aglow. It was like a crown. Ushnei luchos abonim horid biyado v'chasu b'hem shmiras Shabbos v'chein kasu b'soraseh. And it was written on it, and he brought down the two tablets, and it was written on it the laws of Shabbos, and so it's written in the Torah. So the davening gives us the impression that Shabbos was given to Moshe as a gift. That was a special gift that was given to Moshe. So here in the davening, it's kind of something that you wouldn't expect. Shabbos is not connected to the Jewish people as a whole. It's connected specifically to Moshe Rabbeinu. And then what's interesting is it says Ushnei luchos abonim horid biyado. He brought down the two tablets. V'chein kasu b'sorasech, and so it's written in the Torah. You would expect that the text, the term my father would use is the proof text, you would expect would be from the Ten Commandments. He brought down two tablets, and this is what was written in the Ten Commandments. The problem is that the proof text that's brought by the davening is not the Shabbos from the Ten Commandments. Zachar Sema Shabbos Lakadsho. Rather, it's the description of Shabbos that we use for Kiddush that comes from the parsha of Kitisa. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael as HaShabbos lasos as HaShabbos lidorosam bris olam. Now, why is that? So the Torah tells us the story in Kitisa is the story of the golden calf. Moshe breaks the luchos. He gets a second set of tablets. He comes down. He has this crown of glory, which is this light. And right before that whole story, it tells you about Shabbos. Somehow, the davening connects Moshe to Shabbos. This was Moshe's gift that Moshe shared with the people. That's the impression that you get from the davening. That's the idea. They want to connect Moshe to Shabbos specifically. Okay? That's kind of an interpretation of Shabbos. Not necessarily something that has to be that way, but that's the interpretation of Shabbos. So Friday night, you have Shabbos, which is the Shabbos of creation. Shabbos afternoon, you have the Shabbos, which is the Shabbos of the future. And then in the morning, you have Shabbos, which is the Shabbos of Har Sinai, of Mount Sinai, but actually more specifically, it's the Shabbos of Moshe. It's the Shabbos which was a gift given to Moshe, and Moshe shared it with everybody else. And the next paragraph says, and Moshe shared it with us, and we should appreciate it. Moshe could have shared it with anybody. But he didn't give it to the other nations. He gave it to the Jewish people. You see, somehow the transmission here becomes what's important. God gave it to Moshe. Moshe gave it to us. That's what's special about Shabbos, right? That was the kind of the first Mishnah we learned. My father loved Pirkei Avos, right? The other thing we could have learned was Pirkei Avos, right? So the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai Masar Yeshua. There was a chain of tradition. So here also there's a chain. God gives Moshe the 10 Commandments, the laws of Shabbos. Moshe gives us the laws of Shabbos. Moshe could have given it to anybody, but he doesn't give it to you.
So Velona Sato is referring to Moshe doesn't give it, not referring to God doesn't give it?
I think this whole, the topic is Moshe. Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelko. Velona Sato Hashem Elokeinu l'goyehu haratzos. Now, I mean, it says that it's God giving it to everybody, but it means it's God giving it to the Jews through Moshe. The whole idea is through Moshe, because Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelko. He's not necessary here, but here it's a special relationship that Moshe has, and that makes the Torah even more special. That God gives it to Moshe. That this was the transmission. God gives it to Moshe. Moshe gives it to us. And again, this is an interpretation. This is a commentary on the story in the Torah. You don't know what was it like. What was the experience of Matan Torah like? And here the davening gives us just kind of a glimpse into what the transmission was like. God gave it to Moshe. Moshe gave it to us. It's true about the whole Torah, but it's especially true here about Shabbos. And they're making that point about Shabbos. So that's a great point, just about how davening is a commentary on the Torah, kind of gives us an insight into what, into how this works. By the way, you could do this with everything, especially Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. You look at the davening, and each line in the davening is actually a commentary on something, on some story in Jewish tradition. But what I want to show you is the following interesting thing. So what's the problem here? So first of all, it's kind of funny. Yisbach Moshe Matnas Chelko kind of comes out of nowhere, right? It's kind of like, where does this come from, right? The fact that we talk about Moshe and Moshe gave us the Torah, where does this come from? So I want to show you something cool. If you look at this paragraph, Yismach Moshe b'matnas Chelko, ki eved ne'eman karasula. That's line number 1. Moshe rejoiced at the gift of his portion when he was called a faithful servant. Yismach Moshe b'matnas Chelko. Line number 2 is Klil tiferes b'rosho nasato b'yamdo lefanecha har Sinai. You placed a crown of glory on his head. Klil tiferes b'rosho nasato. Third line. Ushnei luchos avanim horid biyado b'chasu b'hem shmira Shabbos. And the 2 tablets he brought down, and there was written on them the laws of Shabbos. First line, Yismach Moshe b'matnas Chelko. Second line, Klil tiferes b'rosho nasat. Third line, Shnei luchos avonim horid biyado. Now, what's interesting about that? Yismach Moshe. What's the first letter in Yismach Moshe? Yud. What's the first letter in Klil Tiferes Barosho Nasa? Kaf. Now, in the alphabet, Yud and Kaf follow one right after the other. Kaf follows after Yud, right? The third line says, Ushnei luchos avonim horid biyado. When you look at that line, you say, the word shnei is actually unnecessary. The 2 tablets he brought down. We all know that there are 2 tablets. So the word shnei is not a necessary word. That was probably added later. The first word in that line is actually luchos avonim horid biyado. First line, Yismach Moshe. Second line, Klil Tiferes. Third line, Luchos Avonim. Yud, Kaf, Lamed. Now you tell me what that means. What would my father say? What does that mean? First line, Yismach Moshe. Second line, Klil Tiferes. Third line, Shnei Luchos. Yud, Kaf, Lamed. What does it mean? What it means is like this. You never have, the davening is full of prayers that are based on an acrostic, right? Aleph to Tav, right? The keynotes on Tisha B'Av, the davening, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the slichos that we say, all are Aleph to Tav. You never have an alphabet that just takes a few letters from the middle of the alphabet. It never happens. You have it. Sometimes you have it front ways, Aleph to Tav. Sometimes you have it backwards, Tav to Aleph, like in Tikkun to Shabbos. But you always have the whole thing. You never have it as a few letters. But here, Yud, Kaf, Lamed. That makes you wonder, how could it be? Yud, Kaf, Lamed. Just 3 letters out of the alphabet. So what do you think?
The middle 3?
They're the middle 3, and therefore what? They are the middle 3, more or less. 22. So this is 10. This is 10, 11, and 12. So it's pretty close to being the middle. That's good. They're the middle. But what? Give me. Tell me a story.
Maybe there was a poem that he
Here
took
you
it
go.
from. Yeah.
Right. You see,
An ancient.
this
prayer.
is what my father would like, and that is, you can't prove this, but use your imagination. Of course, there was a poem that started at Aleph and went to Tav. And of course, what happened? That was part of the davening.
Too long. It was too
It was too long. So one Shabbos morning, somebody said, what? It's too long. Let's just take a little piece of it. And they took this little piece.
There was a problem with that because the Jews, we keep adding to the prayers. We've never, ever taken anything out.
Yeah, that's true, but you understand that sometimes can happen, that it's too long. So they just took a little piece of it. Now, that also would explain why this is the only Shmon Esrei that doesn't start with Atah.
Oh.
You see, if there's a long prayer and the first letter of that prayer was Aleph, probably the first letter of that, the first word of that prayer was Atah. So probably this also started with Atah, but we knocked it out and we start just with Yisvach Moshe. So I just want to show you the way the davening develops. I can't prove this. You'll never be able to prove this because we don't have that. We don't have that long prayer anymore. But when you look at something like this, I just want to show you how you look at a davening and you say something's wrong here, right? Something's wrong because it doesn't start with that Tav. If it's the only Shmon Esrei of the whole year that doesn't start with that Tav, I want to tell you something's wrong. It needs an explanation. And then you see an acrostic that's only Yud Kaf Lamed. And you're right that it's the middle 3 letters. And that's interesting, it's the middle 3 letters. But still, you don't find it anywhere in the acrostic just with 3. So you imagine, so then you start being creative. You say, there must have been a longer prayer. And they chose only these 3 verses that focused on Moshe. Probably a longer prayer that started with that top. And these 3 verses that focus on Moshe. So what you have here is the Shmon Esreis of Shabbos. Why is it that the Shmon Esreis of Shabbos are different one from the other? So the answer is, I think, that when it comes to Yom Tif, there's really one theme of Yom Tov. We choose in our Yom Tov davening not to focus on the specific holiday. We focus on holidays generally. Right? We mention the specific holiday, but we talk about holidays generally. So therefore, the Shemona Esrei are the same. Ma'ariv is the same as Shabbos, and Shabbos is the same as Mincha, because it's about the holidays, and they're the same, right? Even Rosh Hashanah, even Yom Kippur, they're the same. There's one theme on each one of these days. But Shabbos, it's not so, and that's what's so interesting. Shabbos, there are different kinds of themes. One idea, Zeichel and Maaseh Bereishis, right? The Ten Commandments, right, in Shmos talk about Shabbos as being commemorative of creation. Then the Ten Commandments in Devarim talk about Shabbos being commemorative of Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. We mentioned both in the Kiddush, right? There are two ideas. And then, of course, we have the idea of Yom Shekulo Shabbos, the idea of Shabbos in the world to come. So Shabbos is the only day during the year in which there are multiple themes on the day itself. There are multiple ideas that need to be reflected, and those are reflected in the Shemona Esrei. So we don't know who wrote the Shemona Esrei. We don't know how the davening developed, but it's so striking that the Shemona Esrei are different. It kind of allows you to kind of jump up and say, wow, something special about Shabbos. It must be that the themes of Shabbos are special. And I think the most interesting of all of them is the davening in the morning, the fact that we focus on Moshe, because that's a surprise. On Friday night, the fact that we talk Hidashta, the fact that God made it holy, we quote the psukim from creation, we use them in Kiddush, that's not a surprise. The davening in Mincha, Atah Echad V'Shimcha Echad, is a famous pasuk. That's also not surprising. In the morning, the Shemona Esrei is surprising. And that's interesting, right? It's surprising because all of a sudden Moshe becomes the focal point of the Shemona Esrei in the morning. Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelka. And the proof text, V'shamru v'nei Yisrael HaShabbos, that's the Shabbos of Moshe. That's not the Shabbos of the Ten Commandments. That's the Shabbos of Moshe. Moshe plays an integral role. And I think that's the idea of transmission. And I think that's a really, really nice idea. And as we commemorate my father's yurtzeit, I think that's an idea that that was very close to his heart. The idea of transmission. He spent many a time over the 50 plus years that they lived in this house, transmitting Torah. And long before he transmitted Torah, I'll just tell you that they used to have meetings here when we were in the Hebrew Academy. So my father was the chairman of the Board of Education. They don't even know what Board of Educations are anymore. But in those days, in the 70s, I guess, late 60s and 70s, that's what they had, the Board of Education. It was actually run by somebody from Ohab Shalom, who's long gone. His name is Rabbi Meyer Greenberg. He actually has an interesting history. He was the founder of the Hillel in Maryland. So now they have 400 people who come to dinner on Friday night in the Hillel in Maryland. So Rabbi Meyer Greenberg was the one who founded that Hillel. I'm sure I didn't have 400 people in that Hillel. Anyway, so he and my father used to run the Board of Education. They used to have the meetings here in the house. Long before they had the classes here in the house, they used to have those meetings to talk about how to teach Torah to kids from Washington, D.C. who didn't have any background. The teachers, came out, I don't even know. There's an interesting, I don't know if you follow this, the Jewish Insider now has a series about, unfortunately, it was a tragedy 45 years ago in 1984. Whenever that wasn't 45 years ago, 40 years ago, 39 years ago, Rabbi Rabinowitz was murdered. And Rabbi Rabinowitz, it's an interesting story, but I want to tell you something that they didn't mention there. They mentioned it in passing, but they missed the point. Rabbi Rabinowitz was a teacher in Hebrew Academy. They say then that the reason he took the job in Hebrew Academy because they didn't pay him enough money in Kesher, so he needed some extra income, so he taught in the Hebrew Academy. We as kids didn't know any of that stuff about his, about how he made a living. All we knew was that there was this Eastern European rabbi who taught us. And he was a sweet man, and he taught us, and we couldn't relate to him, obviously. He was from another generation, another world. But I'm sure that everybody who we taught remembers him, right? And he made an impression because we didn't know people like that. Literally, we didn't know anybody like that. And there was Rabbi Rabinowitz who taught us, and that was, those were the days. That was the education committee and the board of education, and that's what they worked on. People like Rabbi, how Rabbi Rabinowitz would teach us, and those were the meetings that went on here, and then that led to all the classes that took place. So Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelko, Moshe Kibel Torah Messina, the period of Sfiras Omer, I think is really a very applicable message to remember this year time. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to just give everybody kind of an encouragement and our wish and our hope that amazing amounts of Torah be studied here in this house, in this room over the course of the next year, and you should grow bigger and bigger and more energy, and it's all in the spirit of Yismach Moshe and Moshe Kibel Torah Missinai and Ben Mintz sitting here and creating this house as a house of prayer. Thank you.